Steve Moore and I have become friends through watches, which must come as a shock, I'm sure. Steve holds an instrumental place within the mill sub community, as you'll soon understand in this episode. I've gotten to know Steve through NABS, an annual meetup of watch collectors which changes locations each year. But this episode is a story of sorts about a particular watch that is more or less a sequence of events spanning over a decade. This conversation technically started in person in a restaurant bar in Manhattan several weeks ago. I then said, we need to hit pause on this so we can record it. So here we are. I bring you my conversation with Steve Moore, also known as Moore Watches on the Gram. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard Age Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to a video podcast from Standard H. I've got my buddy Steve Moore here, Moore Watches on Instagram. This episode's going to be somewhat of a special one for a couple of reasons. One, we don't often talk a hell of a lot about vintage on this show, which I'm excited for. I myself have sort of historically been more of a modern guy. I like to have the watches typically tell my story. But I've got the itch, right, about vintage, and I have one hell of an enabler on the line here, in Steve. But I know Steve through NABS. For those of you who don't know what NABS is, Steve, do you want to give like a 30-second introduction of what NABS is?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on the show. I'm an avid listener, so it's fun to take
Oh, awesome.
part in this as well. Yeah. I'm Steve, and NABS, just really quick, is it's kind of a joke. The name is a joke, but it's now, this year will be the 11th year of the in-person meetup.
Yep.
But group of us going back probably 15 years were sort of internet watch friends, and back then the world was a lot different. Watches took a long, maybe not so different. They took a long time to sell. And so you would call up one another on the phone or, chat and say, hey, does this watch look good? Where do you get your advice from, kind of thing. And there were still watch forums back then. Now it's all Instagram.
Sure.
So we decided to meet up once and in Texas. So John Field, Beaumont Miller, another NABS person, and
Shout out,
six
John.
others. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Decided to meet up, and we've been doing it every year. And this year will be number 11.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
it's kind of the only, I mean, there's certainly Rolly Fest, which is super prestigious and large. NABS is relatively small. It's about 30 people each year. So it's not like this 200 person event. And it certainly doesn't have the budget. We take no funding, right? It's sort of self-funded.
Yep.
Um, Predominantly vintage collectors, but of all types, right? A
Yep.
lot of heavy Rolex, but all shapes and sizes. And even though, so the NA is North American and then Advisory Board Summit. So we jokingly call each other the Advisory Board, just as a made up name. And then there was nothing in North America. There was European Passion meetups. You're probably familiar with this, and other, um, regional events. And so we were kind of poking fun at that. So
Right.
North American Advisory Board. Then the meetup is the summit. So a made up name, but good nonetheless.
Yeah, super fun, great group of guys and gals potentially. But yeah, just a fun time. Um, this may or may not serve as a crash course in the mill sub. I often joke about a lot of things, I should say. About I know a little about a lot, so I know just enough to get myself in trouble. And this all sort of culminated when you and I were actually, it was like a pregame event, let's call it,
Right.
at Rolly Fest when you and I started chatting over a cocktail, and I said 5513, 5517, and that's the extent of my mill sub knowledge, aside from sword hands and fully gradiated bezels. Um, it, it, and it's only due to the fact that like I, it's just never been across my desk, so to speak. And now I sure as hell don't have the budget for one, so it's almost kind of pointless to try to look at them from a desire standpoint rather than just kind of let's just call it a scholarship standpoint, which is something that you're well versed in from a scholarship standpoint.
Well, I try to be. To be kind of an early disclaimer, there are a handful of people, two or three in the world, that have spent, actually maybe even more than that, that have been doing mill subs stuff for much longer than I have.
Sure.
Um, However, I tend to hyper focus on things and really enjoy Jeff Hess talks about the Submariner, the vintage Submariner is sort of the scholar's watch. And
Hmm.
that may be a little bit silly to hear, but there's a lot of details, as you well know, within these watches, and even more so in the mill sub. And another maybe secondary disclaimer, uh, they're amazing, but they're also absurd, and they're certainly not for everyone. Like you really have to want one, and you really have to be absurd. You really have to be willing to put the capital forward to do this. And along with that, you have to have a lot of help from a lot of great people to make sure that you're getting the right one and a good one and one
Sure.
that's correct because there's details of these things that go far beyond a normal vintage watch, which both makes it amazing and a potential disaster at the same time. And so, um, myself and Greg Petranzi, who kind of went all in. In fact, he had the first one, and then I ended up with the second and the third. I'm sure he'll add another one here soon. But yeah, the short of it was we sat down at that having some drinks, and it's not just about the mill sub itself, but this one in particular kind of had this adventure that went along with it. And I know I took some notes for my own sanity, and I know I kind of for the listener, I pre-shared this. So I think I even saw your name kind of pop up in there. So did you have a chance to look at that, by the way? I'm
Well,
calling you out.
no, 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 no. It's actually both. It's you can call me out and I've looked at it. So
Okay,
I've
lovely.
started it. I haven't finished it. So
Okay.
I will say that. So basically what Steve is referring to is a Google document, quite frankly, known as the SBS sub. And I have it to my right because I figured we'd be talking about it. And with your permission, maybe I can overlay some images or something later.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with that in mind, this sucker is 14 pages long, and I'm sure Steve took these notes again, not only just to keep his head on straight, but also just from a timeline perspective, things seem as though they may or may not get wonky. So this is just
The,
great to see this all laid out sort of in a chronological event, even if it's just how Steve came across it in order.
I will tell you that my father always used to say, pleasure is in the pursuit, not the attainment.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
I hear him saying that. I can hear that in my ear, and it applies to many things in life. Um, I wasn't planning on getting another mill sub because I had one that I got through Adam Golden
Okay.
a year and a half or a year prior. And, this one showed up via kind of a little bit of a controversy. And so the short of it is there's a gentleman in London who I've met his acquaintance now. He was able to buy a watch off the wrist of a former SBS operator. And that's basically the British version of the Navy SEALs. And he had it for about a year and then decided that he really didn't like, and this is truth, didn't like the way that the NATO felt on his wrist. And so he decided to sell it. That's fact.
Okay.
So he buys it off the wrist of this original owner. And by the way, for the listener, uh, you weren't supposed to keep these things, right? He kind of lost it and he kept it, right? So
Right. It was
these,
lost in
they were
quotes.
lost. In
Yeah.
fact, another sort of adjunct to that statement, many of these were destroyed on purpose.
Hmm.
And so when the contract was up from Rolex, so for those that don't know, from about 72 to 79, Rolex supplied the Ministry of Defense, the UK, with Rolex watches for both the Army and the Navy, and for subgroups within each of those. So you had clearance divers, you had SBS, which were sort of these operators, these like kick open doors kind of guys, helicopter pilots, engineers, and some others, right? So you have the divers and then the hitters and pilots and kind of the of a different variety. Also the SAS, Special Air Services. And so many of these were lost or destroyed or there's very few that are full spec, meaning they have all the parts that they should. So kind of jumping back into the story, I got a phone call. I wrote it down May 12th from Adam, interestingly enough, and saying he had a client that put a watch in auction. I don't want to say the auction house,
Okay.
but effectively he was arguing with them about this watch. He goes to put it up for sale. And when he received it, it didn't have the bezel or the insert, which is a very expensive piece of hardware.
Yeah.
And so he attempted to find one on the open market and add it to the watch, and then he decided to sell it. Well, there's some other
So,
problems. Yeah, go ahead.
Steve,
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, because I need to interject only due to the fact that I'm insane about details.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
these were destroyed on purpose oftentimes. Is that why there's such things like just the bezel being open market available versus like, well, if it were really destroyed, some of these bezels wouldn't be around, right? Or
Yeah.
is it just kind of where are we with that?
Yeah, two different points, and I didn't illuminate that very well.
That's okay.
So there's many of these watches that have been, if they survive, they've been civilianized. So they've gone to Rolex for service.
I see.
They've had the sword hands changed, and so as a visual, they kind of look like they have Omega Seamaster 300 SM300 hands. And funny enough, they kind of look like they have SM300 bezels, meaning they have a full 60-minute tick around the outside rather than the 15 that you would see on a normal Submariner. So they've had parts exchanged during service, like many other vintage Rolexes have.
Sure.
It turns out that the bezel that he bought, so the original bezel was ripped off in the North Sea on a mission. So the guy had it pulled off. It went in. He had the bezel replaced when it was done. It had a civilian one put on it. He wanted to make it full spec, meaning having all the parts. He went to the open market to buy one, and it ends up the bezel. And this was the point of contention with the auction house that it was fake. It was aftermarket, but it was like a really good fake insert. And the cost of this is horrifically expensive. It's a very expensive mistake.
Yeah.
Um, it's in the realm of just the insert 30 to 40,000 or more.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, let's go through very quickly, just like off the cuff, the
Yeah.
differences between a sub and a mill sub. You've got welded lugs. Uh, um,
Spring
instead of
bars,
spring bars. Yeah. So they're
like a
welded
welded
spring
sawn lug.
bars. Yeah. So it's fixed lugs. You've got this fully gradiated bezel, or the insert at least, right? You've
Yep.
got sword hands.
Yep.
You may or may not have the tritium T at 6 o'clock,
They
or
should
all
all
of
have
them
that.
do. Okay, so
Yeah.
all of them
Yep.
do, and they're usually a two liner.
They are. They're all two line. Yep.
Yep. So
Um,
you've
yeah.
got the
And
tritium with you got a big T with a circle around
Circle
it.
T. Circle T.
You got the circle T there. Not no shout out to Scotty Cameron there with the tour only putters. Anyway, golf reference.
Golf
Um,
reference.
so these things, there's only a few things that really distinguish these things. So the fact that this gradiated bezel is missing, right? I mean,
It's a
that's a
big
huge tick.
it's a big deal for the purist collector. I will say that I really enjoy, and this kind of leads into the next part of the story, but I don't mind if it's not full spec as long as you buy appropriately. Like I think
Mm,
even if it has like the dial and the case, and many of them have a wrong case back. I'll get to that later as well.
sure.
Meaning the case back has been switched, meaning it's got a different watch's case back, a different Millsub's case back. But if you buy it right, to have one, have it serviced, make it watertight, there's still a lot of cool heritage there because of the welded bars, because of the special dial. It'll have one of four dials. There were four different dial types
Okay.
of different versions: serif, non-serif, what we call a smudge, and then a maxi dial. Most people know what a maxi dial is. It's kind of
Yeah.
it has bigger plots and a certain coronet.
Yep.
Um, and then there's cool engravings on the outside of the case back that denote the year it was issued and if it was a Navy or an Army watch. And the other thing that's kind of cool in a nerd way is that the inside of the case back, or the case back itself, is mated to the mid case. So they're both serialized. And so there's one case back for one mid case. That's it.
Interesting. Got it.
And
So it's like
so
matching VIN numbers on a car,
exactly,
you know.
it's exactly like a vintage car. And so when you have the matching numbers and when you have the correct numbers on the back and when you have all the other parts that you mentioned, it's really rare. There might only be, the guess is 100 or 120 that are full spec in the world.
Wow. Spindy.
Yeah. And now there was originally, some site over 1,000, maybe 1,200 initially distributed, given to the military. That's debated a little bit, but that's a good rough number. And then, the next number, I think there's a little more than the 120 number, the 100. I think it's probably 150 or 160, but there's still not very many. So if you want one, it's rare air.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the people that I mentioned before that are extremely knowledgeable and have been very helpful to me. They've been studying this and they're maniacal about documentation of where they have been sold and the history. And so there's like a living ledger of these watches of, hey, they sold, 25 years ago at some auction or whatever. So there's a great bit of scholarship around that as well. So it's kind of a weird subculture within vintage collecting and also military collecting. But I love it. I love these details. And
Is there
so
anywhere online that tracks when these switch hands or like, hey, that one
not
did
public,
actually get not publicly. Okay, so maybe
not,
within the collector world, there's like a Excel sheet somewhere.
oh yeah, 100%.
Oh wow,
Yeah. Um,
that's awesome.
and so you find another kind of weird element of this. Mill subs typically do worse at auction. They trade through private hands at a higher amount if it's from the right person.
Okay,
Then they will bring it's kind of because usually watches big numbers come from auctions, right? That's a standard. If it's the great watch, right?
we
It's
just saw
that.
it happen. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. That is not the case with mill subs. It's sort of a little bit weird. I haven't bought one at auction. I wouldn't be opposed to it if it were the correct watch. We've seen them bring, crazy prices in the past. Um, so they can bring good money, but typically the best ones travel and exchange hands privately, which is
And
sort
this
of an
is
anomaly.
because the right people need to do the right due diligence, and the vetting is only through these eyeballs of these five
Um,
or eight guys.
there's really two in particular that they know their stuff so well. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know what the right engravings are. In fact, they even advise many of the auction houses as well. So,
Yeah,
if you are, um, I can for those that know, I mean, it's Mike Wood and Jed McCormick are kind of the guys. They host a really great event every other year called Issued. That's nothing but issued military watches. So like the Tudor MN, the Rolex Mill Sub, and so they really have kind of made the mark on this collecting and set the standard. But one fun thing that I've been able to see is from a watchmaking perspective. I will say that and understanding and looking at the engravings and testing some of these, verifying the independent parts, whether it's hands and inserts. Greg Petranzi of True Dome fame
yep.
has really kind of become the watchmaker for mill subs. And so, kind of, I don't work in this industry at all. I'm just a collector, but kind of teaming up with him to help document and authenticate some of these things. I'm proud to say that I've helped some collectors recently authenticate, hey, does this mill sub look good? And I'm very proud of that.
Great.
So there's a lot of sort of information sharing and scholarship that goes into that I enjoy.
Hmm.
And so he looks at them from a mechanical standpoint, and then I really enjoy from the engravings and sort of the history. And so we've teamed up on a couple of late. I will say it's not an official thing that we do, but we do it for close friends, and it can be interesting. And to that end, this SBS mill sub to kind of continue on the story a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so I get hit up about this watch. They're fighting about the insert. I have to tell him that his insert is indeed fake. This
Mhm.
guy is obviously in a bad mood because not only will the auction house not sell it, now he's in the hole even more, right? So you're like down 30 grand or more. And you think you're going to get a payday from the auction house, and neither are good, right? So you get the watch back. And I get talking to him, and I hear about the story, though. How did you get the watch? Who'd you buy the watch from? And he tells me, and he contributes to the SBS Foundation, and so he knows these men that are part of this group, and it aids. It's a veterans organization, and he gives his time and money to them, and had a chance to just randomly buy a watch off a guy's wrist. And I kind of fell in love with the story. And I was okay buying the watch, not having an insert, and it also had a mismatched back. So back to that car example where we have mismatched VIN numbers, maybe it's motor and frame or whatever you might have. But I was like, I kind of like this watch, and maybe I'll just get it serviced and get it watertight and kind of have it as a non-full spec watch that has a great story because he had kind of a digest of this man's service record. So he was in multiple SBS groups. He was attached to the SAS. There's photos of the guy wearing it. This is all really rare and kind of nerdy, cool in a nerdy way, right? So I kind of have a feeling that I know this watch a little better. And I feel like that, well, maybe, it turns out that he decided he was going to keep the watch. And this went back and forth for probably 90 days. And eventually we worked out a deal on the watch itself. Well, like everything else I obsess on, I ended up finding a 16-year-old. So after we had agreed to buy the watch, I flew to London to get the watch. I was there on business, went to pick it up. And I get digging around. So you have a serial number on the case and you have a different serial number on inside the case back. And I found a post from like 16 years ago on a website that no longer works anymore, asking if anybody owned a watch that had this serial number.
This is where you blew my mind in New York City. This is why I was like, you need to come on my podcast. Like, this is
So,
story time. This is a
so
bedtime story.
I know it took us a long time to get to this inflection point, and I
That's okay.
apologize.
No,
We had
no,
a
no,
lot of
no.
other stuff.
My fault too.
So for the listeners that are still around, it gets better. So back when forums were a thing to talk about watches, it wasn't uncommon where somebody might post a serial number and ask a question. Hey, have you ever owned this watch before? Or hey, do you know? Well, it was a really short post. It was like two sentences. And it's like, "Hey, please contact me." And I'm reading it right now if you're the owner of this watch. And I had to it was an archived page, so it wouldn't even work. Like you can't even interact with it. It was on time zone. And the guy's name was Eugene, and I figured out from another post that he's in Singapore. I was like, how many guys named Eugene are there in Singapore? Maybe there's a lot of guys. Maybe there's a bunch of. So to
Yeah,
all the
I'm
Eugene,
not touching that one.
I don't know. Like Eugene, just so where I'm from, like Eugene is a rare name, and I think it's a very sort of Appalachian type, right. I don't know that that's the place. Well, it turns out I couldn't get a hold of the guy, but I got digging around on the other forums, and so in my life and in my past life, I used to be pretty good at finding information, um, just in general.
Sure.
I'll leave it at that. And I end up finding this
For
guy.
those who don't know, Steve is also a massive man. So he has probably a way of getting his way.
No, no, it's not
I'm
that at
kidding.
all.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
It's
kidding.
not that at all. It had nothing to do with
Holding
finding
people up by
information.
the scruff of
Yeah,
their
no, no, no.
neck.
I'm not
And
I'm not holding them over a railing. No violence against Eugene. I promise.
not
So we
over the internet either.
right. Yeah, yeah. Physical nor virtual. I end up finding Eugene and I send a message and I'm like, this is 16 years old, 17 years old. This guy's never going to write back. And I go to bed and I wake up in the morning. And when you wake up and you have that first look at your phone and sometimes things just don't make sense. you get that like message back, and it just says, "Hi, Steve," and there's a giant. He says "bingo" in caps. He's like, "I've been waiting over a decade for the remote chance, and I'm reading this. The watches and backs could be resurrected. This watch sat in my safe all this time. The numbers are engraved correctly on the back, but I can't remember what they are. What are your plans now? Regard, Eugene from Singapore." That's exactly how he wrote it. Eugene from Singapore. And so naturally, being the nerd, I've got to fly to Singapore and meet this guy and get my case back, and he has to get his on his mill sub. Now, for those wondering, I don't like posting like having a numbers are they're important, but they're not important. But it would be like if you found a bag of money on the street, like legally, because the difference between a full spec and a non-full spec watch
Oh God,
is massive.
six
Like,
figures.
yes, correct, correct. And so the fact that Eugene in Singapore wrote me back, and it is, I can't believe it. And so I already had the watch in hand. In fact, had already made plans for it to be serviced and like, okay, like how do I work this out? The story gets even weirder. So I still have to get an insert, which is you could search for 10 years and not find an insert.
This watch is a project car. You know, you
Yeah.
just needed to, get some
Yeah.
period correct items, and it'll take
Yeah.
time to find
Well,
them.
I needed to find a period correct insert for sure,
Yep.
which is hard to do, and I needed to the reunite it with its correct part. A side story. So what used to happen is the Ministry of Defense had watchmakers, and they would get these watches in from the field. This is to explain how why it has a different case back, and they would open them all up, and they would take the movements out, and they take the case backs off, and they would have 10 watches, 10 case backs, 10 movements. And when they were done servicing them, they'd slap them all back together and not look at does the case serial number match the case back serial. They didn't care. And so this one in particular, when I got it, it had issue number 139/74. So it was the 139th ish and issued in 74, but that's wrong. It should have been 347/75. So it's a 75 is the case back it has on it now from issue number 347. And so it got switched, and it's just lucky that it was a one for one switch. Because what often happens if there's 10 watches and I am a watchmaker and I'm lazy, I might have it may take three moves to reunite with the right case back.
Right.
And so this is super rare. This is so it's like I can't calculate the odds on this. And so that's how they were switched. It was probably switched when it was still in service. It had to have been. Interestingly, this watch, so the Rolex stopped using these in 79. This one was actually used in service until 95.
Wow.
But my guess is that it happened sometimes, in the late 70s or maybe early 80s. So it'd been that way for a long time. Kind of interesting. And so I meet up with Eugene. He's fantastic. There were some other Singaporeans I knew out there. We kind of had a nerd watch meetup. We get the case back. Um, there's a whole side story to that too. I won't even go into, but we had to find a watchmaker that would meet with us on a Saturday. I was there on a layover headed to Vietnam for work.
Oh God. So
Was
you just so happened to be passing through.
I sketched that is correct. So I had to wait many months, because I was like, look, let me just tie these things together because I travel a lot anyway for work.
Yeah, totally. I
And
was like, the finding the bag of money thing was kind of like, okay, well, the Singapore air flight was paid for. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I needed to have a layover anyway, so it kind of worked out. And so you're on a layover. We find the guy.
fantastic.
A similar story, and I'll cut this one a little shorter. But Greg Petronzi gets an email from a guy um, in Cyprus
Of course. The other side of the world.
that was offered a watch that this friend of his has owned for 25 years. That was like this weird hybrid kind of mill sub that had the correct insert on it, like the insert I needed. But he's like in Cyprus. He he needs to pay 20,000 pounds for it. The watch is kind of weird, but the guy's had it for a long time. I'm 99% sure the insert's correct over the pictures that I see. I do a video call with the guy. I do a deep dive. Turns out he was a Royal Commando too. He's retired to Cyprus. Like I kind of put the dots together.
Wow.
I trust the guy, but the guy doesn't have enough money. This is like, by the way, never, if you're listening to this, don't ever do this. Like, do not do what I did. He only had 10,000 pounds. So I sent this man in Cyprus 10,000 pounds.
Never
So
having
you
met him.
never met him. Had two video calls with him. His name's Simon. He's awesome. Um, he agrees to meet me in London on another trip. We meet at a pub, but on the way there, he loses his cell phone. And so he's contacting me from basically a burner phone.
Oh
So
my
everything
God.
is like, I'm going to lose a kidney. So like there's a lot of other things I did that I won't go into on this, but it was really kind of like not something you would want to do. And so he comes in, it's him. I chose the location. It was a pub in Windsor that I was familiar with. We end up having an amazing time. We still talk. He gets this watch in. I'm doing an inspection of the insert and the watch for his benefit. I've already given him 10,000 pounds. I do my tests on this insert and tell him congratulations.
Sorry. So
Yeah.
Simon was just trying to buy himself a watch and he was 10K short and you loaned him 10K so that he could buy this watch for himself? Or
Yeah.
is there the understanding that yes, I will loan you this $10,000 and then I'll give you another 10 or 20 when I see it because you're not keeping the insert? Little do you
That's
know.
exactly it. That's exactly it.
That's amazing.
That's exactly it. Because he was like, "What's the insert worth?" And I said, "Well, do you really want to know?"
More than the watch, that's for
More
sure.
than the watch, more than the watch, exactly. And he's like, "Well, that makes me uncomfortable." And I was like, "It doesn't me." I was like, this is if this is what takes you to be able to get the watch, I will then buy it. You keep the watch. I don't want the watch. I want the insert. I'm going to give you 10,000 pounds, and then I'm going to pay you the rest after." So
Is he
we
even
meet up.
aware of like what that insert? Because he's probably like,
Yeah.
this American guy is crazy. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I told him. I said, "Look, I said I would pay you if you were in my city or in North America. I would pay you. I'll just go ahead and say I'll pay 40 grand for the insert." I was like, "But the fact that I have to fly my ass all over and lend you money, I'm going to pay you 35." And he's like, "Why
deal,
were you
deal,
honest?" He's like,
deal.
he's like, "Why were you honest with me?" I was like, "Because that's how I operate. Like that's how I operate." I was like, "But I'm putting myself out there in many ways. And again, don't do any of what I just did. This is like scam city.
Yeah, you
All
also need to be Steve size to do this because
well, you need to have a background in being aware of, okay, like I'm meeting a stranger in London and all these other variables that go into this. That's not the focus of the show, but
right,
uh,
right, right.
but this or I don't want to make it the focus of the show, but
No.
yeah, you don't want to do. There's several levels of bad here, but it ends up that it all works out. All of this works out, and I get this insert, and so I'm popping it out with my hands out of the bezel. I'm using like there's a nice trick where you use like two credit cards or like a hotel key. You switch these things. Part of the deal is that I had to give him an insert like to replace it to put in his watch that he got. So I was like, you can pick whatever insert I've got. Like, here's 25 different inserts. Pick whatever. Which one do you enjoy the most? Right.
Or
And
just
so,
give him the story of Platoon and take the bezel too.
right, right, right. Or no, that's not Platoon. It's
Or
well, if you're talking about Apocalypse Now, the GMT.
Apocalypse Now. Yeah, sorry, sorry, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now. Sorry.
Okay. Well, yeah. No, I gave him all the rest of it. But so anyway, so Simon is thrilled. And here's the funny part though. So some of the listeners will appreciate this. So he's sharing all this with his wife, who's a lovely lady. She's a former ESPN like F1 reporter, like
Oh,
she's actually very famous. She's retired now, but well-known person, and that's part of what when I tracked all this stuff down about this guy, I was like, okay, like these are real people, right?
sure, sure.
And so uh, he lets it slip at some point, and I hope Simon's okay me telling this, that his wife got madder than hell at him his wife was like, "You trusted him?" Because I said, "Hey, when I get back to the States, I've got it set up where I can't wire remotely. Like I have to go into my banker's like I'll be back Monday. You'll have your money. Like I will message you." She was like, he's never gonna pay you. His wife said this to him, and I'm like, I just give you 10,000 pounds
Sight
to a stranger.
unseen almost. Yeah, yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like I found that kind of funny. And he got paid, and he bought a bunch of other watches and
Sure.
like a
Sure he
motorcycle
did.
and some other stuff, right? So, but anyway, yeah. So now I have a case back. Now I have an insert. But better than all of that, there's the adventure. There's all these other people that were involved in this sort of motley crew. Side note, so I don't have unlimited funds. I had to sell some watches.
Been there.
One of the what yeah, I had to sell some stuff to cover to offset. In fact, this watch was entirely paid for out of other stuff. And one of the things that I'm really proud to share, because it was an amazing conversation. Getty Lee bought my GMT, so I had a vintage GMT, a gilt dial. And I happened to be going to Toronto, which is his whole hometown, and he met me in the lobby of a Marriott, and we sat for an hour and a half. And I had legitimately one of the best conversations, like probably top 50 conversations I've had in my life with Geddy Lee, who, for those that don't know, um, lead singer of Rush. And so he's a big watch collector. He's also a bird watcher. And so Geddy Lee played a role in this like weird ass mill sub story, and sort of offset the costs by buying one of my GMT. So Geddy Lee has um, a role in this weird watch.
Wow. That's
You know who
crazy.
Geddy Lee is. Like, Geddy. Like,
Well, I kn Neil Peart is my guy from Rush. Like, I mean,
okay,
as a drummer, like
right.
that's the guy who's like
Okay.
in
Getty
the
is,
list in the
yeah,
list of what are there, three members, right? I think historically.
there's three. There's only three.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's two now, right? And they're going on
Right.
tour again, but without
Yeah.
Neil.
But yes, definitely Geddy Lee. Um, it's such a fascinating story. Um, and this was the watch that I held, right, in the
Yeah.
bar. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think
And
I
there's a
took
photo. You took a photo of me with wearing this watch, and also so this is an 0552, which means it was a Navy watch. So clearance diver or SBS, like think like Navy SEAL.
right.
And then I have a W10, which was probably owned by a helicopter pilot, but I don't know the story behind it. So this watch, not only now is it complete, but it has like this. I kind of know where it was, and I'm lucky to be able to have images of the man wearing the watch, and kind of a letter of provenance from the guy. Um, that's pretty amazing. There's a photo of him wearing the watch at the early start of the Gulf War in Kuwait. There was a British Airways flight that was they had a hostage situation. The plane caught on fire, it burned down. There's a photo of this guy wearing this watch in front of the carcass of the leftover plane, right? So these SBS guys. So there's some color in this, but
Yeah.
there's also sort of the modern story to it, and that's the piece that I like about vintage, really any watch. There's the stories that it had before you owned it, but I also love the fact that these watches, when I'm gone, will be on someone else's wrist. And so there's this sort of accumulation of the story about each of these watches that I really enjoy. But yeah, good old Getty helped me out. Um, Shout out to Greg Petronzi for doing a great service on it as well. Kind of helping with all things mill sub there. Adam for putting me in touch with, the so Adam was like, "Can you help this guy?" And I was like, "Who is this? Like, what is the situation?" For those who don't know Adam, Adam will sometimes just call you out of the blue and be like, "Hey, like, he needs help or whatever." And I always take time to. He's a close friend, and he's like, "Hey, I've got a friend and a client who's fighting with an auction house. Can you help them?" And I'm like, I guess." Like, so
Wow.
Adam kind of connected me with Dan, who's the owner of the watch. Dan got some new watches that he loves that are not on NATO's. So everyone seemingly is happy. Simon now has probably the best watch purchase ever because he got a watch for like he got paid to take a watch basically, right? And so
Right.
so yeah, a little bit of scholarship. I can tell you also uh another small piece. So the photos, I had photos of the other watch. So Eugene's watch. And he had detailed photos when he had it serviced from Rolex,
Okay.
but they were on, think of photo quality from an iPhone 17 years ago.
Sure. iPhone 1.
It's not as good. And so he
No.
sends me like these potato phone photos. That's an official term, potato phone. And they're blurry. And I need clear photos. Because again, we're talking about these inside engravings inside the case back that are very specific.
Yep.
They're often faked. And then I want the outside of the watch too, which those were engraved not by Rolex, but by, in this case, the Department of the Navy, the MOD, I should say, but the Navy themselves. And I need clear pictures. And he's like, "Well, these are the best I have." And he's like, they're in my safe, and I can't get you better photos for a little while." So,
Right.
the timing of this, you're 16, 17 years between kind of the beginning and kind of he's like, this guy had enough. He's in the medical profession. He had enough resources. He's like, I even forgot that I had this watch. He's like, it's been in the back of my safe. So yeah, so all of that stuff. The other thing that we talked about, I'm sure you've got other maybe points or questions, but you also hit me up. I'm prompting you now. You
Okay.
sent me some images of a watch. I don't know if you remember this or not. You're a busy guy. You travel a lot too. There was a photo of two mill subs recently. Were we
Right.
going to go there?
Oh,
That
shoot.
had you're like, what's the story about this? Oh, I'm prompting. So I'm prompting him on Mr.
Okay.
Smith on something.
Let
So
me
there's
see.
some recent drama in the watch world, not involving these watches, but um there was so Perez Scope had a story up recently about mill subs. You remember that
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Um and so just I think we've got time.
No, we definitely have time. I was just like, oh my God, was this over DM on Instagram or was this text or was this email? It's just, there's too many.
Right,
I was like,
right, right,
how did
right.
I send this to you? And I was trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
even, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is some of the treachery within mill subs you got to watch out for. And so not that long ago there was a mismatched mill sub that sold, meaning it's just kind of a hodgepodge of parts, but it did have good provenance. It was from we knew who the diver was who wore it. So it was kind of a fun watch, but it kind of met the criteria that I was thinking about with this watch initially, where it's a real watch. It just isn't matching parts, and it has some civilian parts on it too. But it's like it's inexpensive comparatively to buy. And this, I know the guy who bought it. He's in love with it, and he bought it and kind of went along with it, and didn't forget about it. But then there was another watch sold at auction. I won't say where, that had the same serial number on the inside of the case back, and that can't happen.
Right.
And so, you get looking at it a little more closely at these, and what had happened is this guy bought this hodgepodge watch recently that had a legitimate case back, correct Rolex and Ministry of Defense part that should have gone on a different mill sub that sold for a lot of money in years prior. So someone is wearing that watch on their wrist thinking, I've got a full spec, you know, paid the right money for it. And little do they know, there's a guy bopping around the UK that's got a watch that he paid, I don't know, a 20th for that's got
Yeah.
actually has the correct case back. And so this is what you get into sometimes. That's why obsessing over engravings and looking at the patterns within them is so important. And so I've always been pretty good at seeing patterns and things. And so that's one of the things I really enjoy looking at. And that's why clear pictures are important. And going through people that are frankly more knowledgeable than I am. I have a lot of passion for this stuff, but I would not call myself any kind of an expert, but I end up getting pulled into conversations that are a lot of fun these days about these types of watches. And so, Perez called that up. I don't know Perez personally. but he is relentless in his research. I'll give him credit for that. If
Yeah.
anyone who's familiar with him, I assume you follow him as well with his auction analysis.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so much negativity in the world that I just like,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's not a shot at him, like no shade,
yeah,
because you're right. I mean, everything I read from him, it's like, how can any of this be denied, right? Like, I mean, that's where I come from when I read that stuff. But I am
yeah.
far much lower on the rung of scholarship, so who am I to say who's right and wrong? And you not calling yourself an expert, like I respect your humility. I mean, obviously, you know more than 99% of the people, I would say. But like for me, these are all the reasons why I haven't really dipped a toe in this stuff because it scares the ever living like bejesus out of me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's, you see similar stuff in other, I mean, anytime you pour enough money into something, you're going to have this kind of thing happen. You see it with Tudor MNs, right?
Sure.
That's a thing, right? You'll see, kind of bad engravings on those. So for anybody who's sort of interested in this stuff, look, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that's kind of decentralized. Um, Greg and I have talked about putting a site together to kind of put some of this information together. We won't sort of disclose all of it
Yeah.
because it ends up benefiting the fakers as much as it helps the kind of the researchers.
Right,
But
because they can say that it was on this breadcrumb trail already and
right,
tell
right.
people, oh, I know the provenance of this watch. And it's like, no, you didn't. You just memorized the website really well.
You just took it. Yeah. And I mean, you look at other people that have done great websites for like the collector. So for vintage,
Sure.
Tudor Sub. So Robbie, who is fantastic. He did Tudor Sub. John
Nice.
Fields got 5513 Matt Dial, an amazing reference, amazing resource. And so this sort of scholarship is something that I really appreciate. And there's several other sites that are similar. We want to do something that's similar, but you kind of have to limit in some areas. You don't want to share 100%, not to gatekeep, because I do this as a collector. I'm not sort of profiting from this, but I also don't want to give kind of any kind of an advantage to anyone who's trying to like cheat someone else, right? And
Yeah,
so
sure.
and that can happen. But for those that are interested in this stuff, I love it. I'm always happy to answer a question on these things. I average about, not a lot, but maybe one a month of questions on a mill sub.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's from a dealer, sometimes it's from someone who, thinks they want to buy one and wants an analysis. It may take a while for me to get back, but I enjoy that, that bit of research and meeting new people that are interested in this stuff. I've learned a lot. I've got, it can be a stressful thing. The bigger advice I'll say is like, I think it's a little absurd too to kind of, I don't advocate spending money on this type of money on these watches. You have to really be crazy to want to like,
Yeah.
get a good sub, spend 10, 20 grand on like a good matte dial sub, or maybe it's more like 12 or 14, 15, and just enjoy that. Or
Yeah.
maybe get like a tutor. But if you're really crazy, and you work your way up to that point in your collecting arc, maybe it's something that you do. But I saw you smile earlier. What you had it? You're very. I know we're doing video now, so did I spark some sort of other emotion or snarky comment on the insanity of collecting these things?
Well, no, I mean, I'm smiling because I'm in the same camp, right? Like, I mean, it's like, make sure you really like this thing before you drop 50, 75, $100,000 on it. I mean, that's just kind of maybe common sense, some would say. But I also think it's important to note, some of these documents online, 5513 Matt Dow, blah, blah, blah. These are living documents, right? With scholarship,
Oh yeah,
information changes, like this stuff is not set in stone. This is not, gospel, so to speak. It's like these guys are doing it for the love of the game. This is not, I'm holier than
yeah,
thou. Like John is the salt of the earth kind of guy. Like Robbie, same. Like shout out those guys. Um, but just for those listening who are like, well, who do these guys think they are? Like calm down. These guys are scholarship type of approach.
yeah.
They're there to help much in the same way you are. No one's trying to fleece anyone.
They are, well, the first point you made there is worth mentioning again, especially in any kind of vintage watch, but especially vintage Rolex. The more you think you know, as soon as you think you know, you don't know. There's all
Yeah.
these areas, there's these gray areas, there's these disputed things within these, like, there's arguments with folks about different things. I've seen some, I love kind of the myth busting. Years ago, there was a gilt dial watch that I really liked, and I was told that it was a Frankenstein watch. It was a small auction out of Sweden.
Mm.
I was told that it was an underlined dial that should only be in a 63 case with pointed crown guards. It was in a rounded crown guard case. Turns out it's one of the very first earliest serial numbers for a rounded crown guard, which is like the crown guard we have today. All of this is probably too much information, but the point is, I was told that it was sort of a bad watch by an expert,
Yeah.
a very smart person, by the way. And he's like, this should never happen. I ended up buying it anyway, and I paid very little for it.
Okay.
I love the watch. I still have it today.
Cool.
I get digging around. I find like four or five more that are like Sweden, underline, rounded crown guard. And there was some weird batch they sent to Sweden.
Huh.
No one knows why. The best example, the best explanation I can give is Rolex back then, especially, they were very frugal. They didn't waste anything. If they would find some dials, they would throw them in a case. John Field and I talk about this all the time. And so there are some rules, but there's always exceptions. And within mill subs, there's all sorts of weird stuff you see. You see different dials out of order. You see serial numbers that are out of order.
Mhm.
You see a watch that was issued in 1977 with a much earlier serial number.
Well,
You see a watch that,
this
yeah,
is
all these
James
things.
this is James Lambden's, distaste for birth year watches because of all the batch manufacturing that used to go on, right? Is that
Oh,
like if the case is from 78, the dial's from 81, the hands are from 79, what year's the watch?
right.
Like
Correct.
you can't and so then everybody's usually going to just default to the papers, right? Like, well, when was the watch purchased? That's the
Right.
year of the watch. It's like, okay, well, I guess is that the watch or is that the piece of paper? Like, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that's just the piece of paper that says your birth year on it. So,
Is that what it traded hand? Yeah. So I haven't heard him make that argument, but he's 100% right.
yeah,
Uh, I've got a watch in front of me that's a 77. Sorry. It's uh it's got a 72 case back on the inside. It's got 77 engraved on the outside.
that's a 5 year variance. Like, what? They're
It's got
just sitting in
Yeah,
drawers.
exactly. And so like you have these things like that are especially in mill subs that are very, you can have a watch that was issued in 79 with a 3.9 million serial number, which is much, much, much earlier, right? So that's whatever it is, 75, 76. So you need to really, like, nothing makes sense within mill subs, even more so. But regular Rolex is that way as well in this era. It's cleaner now, but through the 60s and 70s, it was kind of all over the place in many ways.
And this is where I also get hung up on like red sub 1680s, where it's like, wait, how do you have a Mark II dial in a later year watch than a Mark III dial can exist? Like it's just
Yeah.
like things like that I've seen. I'm like, wait, how is that Mark III dial young or like older than the Mark II dial is? Like it's just like that
Well,
stuff happens all the time.
I'll even add even more confusion. And so there's a 1675 website as well that's fantastic. Shout out to that great reference. What the other thing that happens is T Swiss T runs that one, by the way, his Instagram handle.
Hmm.
Um, so what happens is they think they know it all, and they'll say this is a Mark One, a Mark Two, a Mark Three, a Mark Four, right? So the collectors that spout off this stuff and well-meaning, right? And they're trying to catalog and understand what the hell Rolex was doing because there was different manufacturers of these dials at different periods of times. And you would see a dial also like when subs that you'll see a serif, a non-serif, and then you'll see serif dials show up again as an example, right?
Right.
And different windows. But what happened a couple of times within the GMT is they found another dial, but they've already made their reference. So they already have a Mark One, a Mark Two, a Mark Three, Mark Four. What the hell do you do now?
Right.
what do you do? And so what they've done is now there's a point 0.5 and a 1.5.
Oh, Jesus. All
Right.
right.
So that's the best sort of analysis. That's the best solution that sort of that the collector community came up with to solve this issue. Because they've already sort of you already kind of put out the standard of what these dials are, like the image and the cornet. Usually it's the cornet and the font, the spacing, and it's an attempt to authenticate to say, hey, roughly, this age of watch should have what kind of dial? Or a simpler question, does this watch have an old dial in it or a replacement service dial?
Yeah.
If it's a service dial, that affects the price a fair amount. A wrong
Sure.
dial, an out of order dial can affect it as well, but sometimes there's exceptions to this, right? There's overlapping serial numbers and all sorts of nonsense.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's another sort of twist within these things. And so, have I convinced you any more that you should maybe buy a vintage watch, or are you more concerned now than you were before?
Oh man, I mean it's a TBD scenario constantly, you know, like if everything's
Well,
right in the world and everything lines up and I like the watch you know, like it was with my car. Like when I got my car's almost 18 years old. I'm now a year into ownership, you
right.
know, that kind of thing. Um I never say never, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of the school I'm from is that like I'm hunting something that I'll share with you offline because I don't want to publicly announce it because I also
Yeah,
believe
no.
in jinxing. Uh, you can take the boy out of North Carolina, but you can't take the North Carolina out of the boy. You know, jinxing is real, guys. No, but yeah. So we'll see. You know what? I own several modern Rolexes. I've
Right.
never taken the case back off. Right? I mean, why would I?
Nor should, yeah, there's no reason to.
Right. So does Rolex still stamp the way they used to in the way that you mentioned? Like,
Um, yes and no.
okay, so like if let's hypothetically say, well, I'm not even hypothetical. I own two modern GMTs. Now, one's from 2019, one's from 2022.
Okay.
Do those case backs have their like what happens if I swap those case backs? Like, could you tell?
Um,
Do they have reference numbers on the
Probably, yeah.
inside?
So they will have a reference number.
Okay, well that would destroy that because one's a Pepsi, one's a Batman, right? So like if
Uh, well,
not that I would
they,
want to do that, I'm
they
just
don't.
saying
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They won't include like the whatever the
BLNRO or
BLNR.
whatever it
They
is.
won't.
Yeah, yeah,
They won't have. They won't have the O and the R. They won't have that, but they'll have the reference number.
right. Which they have different
Um,
movements anyway, so I think.
Correct.
Or they
And
definitely have different cases. I don't know if it's the same movement or not, actually.
is one are they is one an 11 and one a 12 series?
Well, one's got the square shoulders, the 19. It was the Batman I got is like dude, not to
So it's an
sound like,
11. It's
oh, I'm special, but like it's got to be one of the last Batmans sold in North America. Like the
okay.
original one
Yeah, yeah,
because it
yeah.
was like November of 2019
Okay.
and then it
So
went out of for 2020.
So they have, if they're both 11 series, you could switch the case backs. They modified the case a little bit, I think, and I don't know if they use the same case back or not, but you won't know, you won't be able to tell the color of the bezel for the listener based on
Sure.
the inside of the case back. It won't have a year. So in vintage Rolex, and I think it stopped in 72, but you used to be able to see the quarter that it was made
Hmm.
and the year.
Oh,
And then it would
wow.
certainly have the reference number. So you'd see third quarter, fourth quarter, first quarter, whatever. Um, and then in some watches, mill subs being one of them, most Comex, which were French, kind of
Yep.
an elite underwater welding and company. Um, and some of the other special order watches will have the serial number, the full serial number in the inside. Others might have the last three of the serial number. So a lot of 1665, like double red sea dwellers, will have the last three. Some will have the full. I bid once on a date just that was had a wooden dial in it. I didn't win it, but it was a special order out of Asia ages ago.
Do you know what kind of
That
wood it was?
I can't remember. It was like burl wood or whatever. It was badass.
Okay.
And I got looking at it and it had the full serial number in it. And I bid up to it like 20 grand on this Datejust, this steel Datejust. And it turns out that the damn thing's worth way more than I thought because it was a special order. That tells you that it's a special order because it's like not a normal watch because they didn't make these in steel. So somebody had like some rich dude had to be like, no, I want this in steel. I want this like basically this gold dial watch, like gold, like special dial that's only in like gold watches in my steel watch.
Right,
And
sure.
then they had so like there's these little like nuances in these. But for your question, now Rolex knows based on the serial number, they can take that serial number and they know that if it was a blue or a black
Sure.
or a
Yeah, yeah.
red or a blue, like they know the bezel assigned to that serial
Right, sure. Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
fact.
It was just
Uh,
a curious question. You mentioned Appalachia earlier. Where are you from originally?
not Appalachia.
Okay.
Uh, I'm from Central Indiana.
Okay. So, and you're still in Indiana.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, okay. Got it.
Yeah, but I live on a
Interesting.
plane. So but yeah, I'm
Are you a
one of my
million miler?
residents. One I might be on the most I have on one airline's about of real miles. I think I've got about 750,000 on United real
Yeah, I was
miles,
gonna
which is
say, what
which is
is, I guess it was Indianapolis, I guess. Is that where you fly mostly out of?
Yep.
Okay, I was like, is that because that's a
It's not a
Chicago's an
United.
American hub. Okay, what is it?
No,
Is that a hub for anything?
United is Chicago. United Chicago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so
But
is
we're like a
American,
Delta.
but I was just curious.
But we're mainly Delta, but most of the places I need to go, United works best.
Okay, got it.
Uh, so yeah, that's what I live on those blue airplanes.
Yeah.
Uh, well, man, I hope for anybody who's the least bit curious, um, you know, like I said, Greg and I are talking about doing a website. Hopefully that'll be out here sooner than later. We want to have it not just about Rolex, but also Tudor and some other brands.
Oh, cool.
Uh, it's something that we really, you know, really enjoy. Um, the other weird thing I'll share that your listeners might find kind of silly, but even the straps, these NATO straps, which people love,
Yeah,
those are even collectible. People collect old, like the old,
like original.
yeah, original. And there's like a modern equivalent that's made called Phoenix is the manufacturer. That was actually the supplier to the MOD and Rolex. But there's a whole subculture around collecting all kinds of old NATOs from all different brands.
Sure,
Um, and these things are worth more than you would expect.
I would
Like,
imagine, even when they're
like they're,
tattered.
yeah, they can be hundreds of dollars, or some people pay, multiple hundreds, which I think is absurd, to be clear.
Yeah, I know what they cost to make now, at least. And
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a whole thing where, in these Perlon straps, the woven ones, those are super popular. So there's a lot of little things like, and the other thing, if you're interested in military watches, there's a lot of really affordable military watches from the 60s and 70s. My favorite are these asymmetric cased chronographs for those that are maybe thinking about getting into them. They have a Valjoux movement in them. There was four different brands. They supplied them to the Canadians, the Brits, the Australians, South African. They're these, CWC Cabot Watch Company made them. There's Hamilton made them. They're $1,000 or $2, between $1,000 and $2,000. They're fantastic. There's lots of military Vietnam era military watches that are affordable and collectible. So there's a lot to love if you like these things and like the stories. They all don't have to be these absurd you know watches that I'm talking about mostly.
yeah,
Uh,
I mean, there's a
there's
there's a big contingency here that are the Gray NATO fans, right? So speaking of NATOs and speaking of CWC, they did a
Let's hear
killer
it.
collab earlier this year, I believe on a titanium case
Oh yes,
watch, which was killer. When I was at Goodwood, I spent the vast majority of that day with James Stacy, and he had that on his wrist, and it is just knockout. It's great. Um,
I haven't
Smiths
held one
as
yet.
well. Speaking of me,
That's
Smiths, the old military watches, those are sick. That brand, for whatever reason, even though it's my last name, makes me think of Adrian Barker from Bark and Jack, which is funny. He's a British guy. residing
Does
in
he like
Scotland.
Smiths? Is he
I
hot
think
on that
he either owns one or used to, but his I believe his dad was in the Air Force, so he's sort of got the bug too for these
brand?
military watches. He's a big Omega guy. Excuse me, British Omega.
Yeah, Omega.
So
Yeah.
but
Well,
yeah, man.
and and Smiths really quickly. Smiths also did. They started off doing like not like watch dials, but like instruments,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and even for motorcycles and aircraft and all sorts of stuff. And then they did the watch too.
I
So
think they were in I can't remember what cars. Maybe some of the earlier Jags. I think Jag also did they use Hoyer? I am now drawing a complete blank. I've taken so many photos of vintage cars. Anyway,
well,
yeah, a lot of that stuff, man. And now you've got, Bentley using certain marks and I think Mercedes once in a blue moon will throw an IWC in theirs, based on their
ah,
Formula One
Schaffhausen. Yeah, great.
partnerships. Yeah.
Oh, back on that titanium, I've not held one of those yet, but those look fantastic.
Killer.
That was a limited run. I don't think they did a lot of them though.
Don't remember how many, but yes, it was definitely limited for sure. I'm going to throw 150 out. I'm not sure how many pieces they made.
Yeah,
100, 200. I can't remember. Um, but yeah, this was fun, Steve. Listen, man, I really appreciate you taking the time. I was
certainly.
super excited to share the story because of how wild it is. And then everybody to sort of get acquainted with who you are as well. So more watches, and that's more with an E on the end. Um, Steve Moore, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you, buddy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.